Today, we're going to be discussing what is the best parenting style for African Americans in the Black community on Freedom Friday. It is Freedom Friday, and you are still not free.
we jamming.
Yeah, we jamming on the intro song. Good day, good people. It is Freedom Friday, and you are still not free, but hopefully you will be freer after this hour with Sharif, El Mekki, and me. Today we're discussing parenting styles, which I think is an interesting topic, but we want to talk about it specific to the Black community, Black and Brown community, communities of color, because there might be something a little bit different in how we have to approach parenting than, mainstream. Other folks have to, other ways that they do it. Anyways, I guess I'll put it that way. Sharif, how you doing, brother?
Good, doing well, man. Missed y'all. Miss Freedom Friday in the audience. Great to be back. Glad to be here. And yeah, excited. This is a important and challenging. Parenting is challenging, right? And so this conversation is important, but also it's not easy. So if anything I say today comes off like, oh, he got it understood, like that is absolutely unequivocally false. It is the hardest, one of the hardest things to do. But much joy with it too.
For the record, so that we can have some basis to start with, you just said parenting is hard. I do want to ask, do you think it's specific to the Black community that there's an additional layer of difficulty when it comes to parenting? But before we go there, I just want to have a level set with what are considered to be some of the parenting styles, and this is by research. What research says are the 4 parenting styles. Actually, there's really more than 4. There's probably 7. I looked at a bunch of research yesterday because I'm writing something about this, about parenting styles. And it turns out there's these 4 parenting styles that people talk a lot about: the authoritarian parent style, the authoritative parent style, the permissive parenting style, and the uninvolved parenting style, and sometimes called the neglectful parenting styles. There are these 4 domains, which I said earlier when I did some research yesterday, it turns out there could be 7 or 8 or more, because each of these domains could have a couple of subdomains. But the authoritarian parenting style focuses on obedience and punishment of children. The authoritative parenting style creates a positive relationship, but still enforces and is firm. The permissive style doesn't enforce rules and kind of takes a kids will be kids philosophy. Let the kids kind of have unstructured kind of play and self-directed kind of lifestyles as children. And then the last one is the uninvolved parenting style, which provides very little guidance and nurturing or attention, but in some ways, creates a lot of independence and autonomy for the child because of that. For me, I think a lot of people in Gen X might say that they had parents that had that 4th parenting style. The latchkey kids, the parents that were, away from home and partying, and you had a lot of free time. The parents that would tell you, get out the house early in the morning on a Saturday morning and don't come back until dusk, that type of thing. Don't be sitting up here in my house, taking up the good air conditioning and everything, So when you think about these 4 styles, what research says specifically for when you don't consider race and you don't consider culture, it says that the authoritative style is the best. It's a little bit of a mix between the authoritarian and the permissive style, but the style that is firm, has boundaries, enforces rules, but still is warm and caring and nurturing and considering of the child's feelings and the child's needs, emotional needs. So those are the 4 parenting styles by research. That is not by culture or by race. That is not specific to us. When you look at those 4 styles, does it resonate with you? Does it make any sense? Is this for us?
Yeah. I mean, it definitely, definitely does. And I could see myself in some of those quadrants. I see my growing up and my parents in some of those quadrants. And yeah, I mean, and it's interesting, like even just how they transition to grandparents and like where they are, where I would say they are now. So no, absolutely. And Hillary Beer talks about this a lot and has actually applied race to some of the work that she's done. So yeah, no, very. I'm laughing when you said the Gen X because I hadn't. I think I had a balance of friends who some who were definitely just out and about, but also a whole lot who had those like, strict parents, that legacy parenting that they talk about. Legacy parenting is
Mhm, mhm.
my parents did it, and so this is how you going to catch it. And their parents did it right, like it just passed on, some of that, and then things started to, veer. But every once in a while, I'll see a clip where some some kid says, "Well, I don't understand. Why did y'all have to drink out of a hose? Did y'all have six?" And then somebody will pop on. Let me see what age. And they roll out all the things that you said. So those are funny. I'm like, yeah, that resonates a lot. We're different. That's why part of the generations are different, right? They're like, we had to do this, do that. Blah, blah, blah. So
It's funny that the different generations style. So my
mhm,
parents were baby boomers. I'm Gen X. I became a parent. I raised a millennial and now raising Gen Zers and one
mhm.
Gen Alpha. And I think the next generation, the millennials, have a little bit difference in the way that they're parenting than previous generations did. One way, let me see if I can share this so that you guys can see this. Here's one difference, not just one difference. Here's multiple differences, but let me
Man,
go
this could
back
be
up
a
to
whole. This
millennials.
could be a whole show. Just this, just spanking.
We'll come back to spanking because I think this is very important. But millennials are more likely to say they sometimes give too much praise. So these are the good job, buddy parents.
Mhm.
So a lot of our parents weren't sitting around all day long saying, "Good job, buddy. You you you
You
finished
didn't
your
do
lunch.
anything.
Good job, buddy. Yeah, like you put on your socks. Good job, buddy. And we didn't grow up in the good job, buddy. We grew up in the, well, I won't say all of we. I grew up in a time where it was like, go play. I was part of the go play generation, right? Go find something to do. Go play, right? The seen and not heard generation in a lot of ways, latchkey and all that type of stuff. But then, I think because of that, a lot of Gen Xers raised their children to be more praiseworthy and supportive and kind of
Mhm.
like encouraging. In a lot of ways, I think probably trying to be the parents they wish they would have had. But now millennials are like two steps down on that now, and it's like everybody's getting a trophy. Like, good job, buddy. You know,
And you see
um,
some of it, and you're probably cringing when you hear like, "Oh, like what are you doing? What are you asking? Why you keep saying that?" I mean, like 1,000 times. Good job, good job, good
good
job.
job, buddy. And I'm a good job, buddy parent. I just want to be real about this. Like, so I'm not making fun of anybody else. I found it really important to praise the kids it doesn't feel like praise. It feels like constant encouraging guidance of your children
Hmm.
and reaffirming their positive uh, steps forward, their positive behavior. Um, Not always criticizing and critiquing the bad, but also always trying to make note of the good that they're doing and supporting the good that they're
Even if
doing.
it's like a neutral thing, like putting on socks. Like,
I mean, putting on
I mean,
socks
for
is
for
like, listen, at a
a two
certain
three
age,
year old, that might be hard. Yeah, but are you
you
still
know,
doing it at 9 and 10? Like, good job. Like, some of it like evolves,
not
right?
at nine
I
and
hope.
10.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's this whole thing around attachment parenting and gentle parenting is now becoming a thing. And Black gentle parenting is becoming its own kind of version of gentle
Mm,
parenting.
mm,
There are this idea that we can't show our children enough love. We can't spoil our kids, really. We can't provide them with too much because the conditions in the world that they are growing up in get harsh at some point. And if they have been nurtured and loved unconditionally in a way that is to this extent of spoiling, they will be more kind of well adjusted and comfortable and secure when they do encounter a world that provides them with circumstances and situations that are daunting. Like, it's like when you discover that you're black, like, in kindergarten, you don't see things yet, maybe about first, second, third, fourth grade, you get comments or something said to you where you start paying attention to, am I different? Like, I thought we were all just kids here. I just thought and at some point that even becomes even more kind of like in your face, but right. Like more, kind of an issue. So if at that point though, you had been neglected, you would take that negative feedback and might even internalize it in a very negative way and do negative things with it. If you have been spoiled, and you have the spoiled parenting style. Now, there's a lot of people listening to this right now are going to give me some pushback on this, but I don't know. This has been my like kind of struggle because I believe I subscribe to the you let your kid sleep with you until they're able to be in their room by themselves. You don't kick them out. You cut their food for them as long as they need you to. You help them with their shoes as long as they need to. But for a lot of people, that's actually considered a bad thing. Like, I read something that said you should stop doing anything for your kids the moment that they're able to do it for themselves. Right. Don't do anything for your kids, nothing that they're capable of doing for themselves. Right. At the moment that they're capable of doing it. What do you think? Call the difference on this: attachment and spoiling, or kind of just independence, making them do everything that they can do right away.
Yeah, it's complicated. I think, one, I totally, it resonates with me just like raising black children. I do think, black children in a space of that's hell bent on expressing anti-blackness, and not just to adults, but to kids too. So that thing, like how do we equip them with the psychological, you know, ability to withstand, resist, push back, no, not lose who they are, like all of those kind of things. The balance, the continuum of, because the question that popped in my head when you're like, all right, I cut it, cut their food until they don't ask anymore or whatever, where others like, no, as soon as they have the ability. And then my first question, like, is that the same for boys and girls? Like how often my youngest daughter, she's 7. If we're in IHOP, she'll still say, she may try every once in a while, she'll try to cut up her pancakes, but then usually she'll be like, all right, can you cut it? Sometimes she won't even try. She'll just say, hey, can you cut this for me? So, I do it willingly. I don't even bat an eye. I'm like, sure, baby. You know what I mean? Like, but I think who the child um, is different. Like, what their particular need, and this is why I think it's hard, particularly if you have multiple children. You got like 10, 12 children, like Citizen Stewart. It's hard to like balance, air traffic controlling as far as like parenting styles. But and I'm in the same boat, so I'm joking, but I think it depends on the time, the place, the situation, the kid, all of that, where I am in that moment, yeah, yeah. But I think black children in particular, if we have to, it's one more thing we have to think about, right? Like people like, oh, like how society may think about, oh, I want to raise my daughter a certain way, right? Like, like authoritarian, like the backlash of that, right? A kid may rebel later, but it also may be where they feel the need to be controlled when they get older because they never had any rules, right? I mean, the ability to step out of that and make their own decisions or make mistakes, right? And so imagine that, like, I don't want that for my children. I certainly don't want that for my daughter. Right. So it just gets complicated. I think the stakes significantly depending on what the situation is.
Get this article right here. This is not a new article. It's from 2017. It says, after Charlottesville, we need to start spoiling our black children. This was just saying a minute ago about like, we can't love too hard on our kids or whatnot. This is let me see where the paragraph is that I think is really important. To cope with life along the margins, we adopted a model of tough love and did our best to prepare our children for the inevitability of mistreatment. Loving your children too hard, providing for them too much, and even too long was labeled as spoiling. We were taught to strategically withhold love to prepare them for the future. This is the toughen them up thing. And we were told to make sure that we don't come to the rescue too early when they cry. In the past, this tactic held merit and served as a vehicle to take us through life, but now I'm making a move for a change. Um, that's a pretty compelling argument, I think, for the. I don't want to say it's an argument for spoiling, but I do think it's an argument for loosening up on the tough love thing. And like, I'm just trying to toughen you up for what life is going to
Yeah.
give you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's listen, it's sometimes heartbreaking, that whole tough love. Cause even as a youth seeing it in supermarkets, in society, like I was just like, wait a minute, I see the tough part. Where's the love? And some of it just seemed to be absolutely brutal to somebody used to say, like, what about like this idea of you want your kid to be able to be velvet and steel, you know what I mean? Like being able
Mm,
to have their boundaries, understand who they are, like that's steel, like that's the movement, but also velvet, this level of tenderness and care, and being able to experience that. And I think what she points out, I think the tough love piece, I think even some of it was absolutely just terror from being terrorized, right? Like, how many, when we're talking about legacy parenting in Black communities, how many people knew like any back talk from a Black child could get them lynched?
mhm,
Any sort of defiance in society could get them killed, get their whole house firebombed, get, you know what I mean? Like Emmett Tilled, and that's why that I think Emmett Till's, murder like really shook the psyche, because so many Black parents like, see, that's what we're talking about in their own parenting, right? Like, how do I, make sure that you are extra deferential, but you're going to practice it with me, as the
mhm,
adult in the
mhm.
house, as the authority figure, and then making sure that you're trained and you are towards that, towards any vestige of authority, right? And I think that continued to just happen. Even today, I'll have debate, not really debates, but conversation with folks who are like, no, yep, I got beat half to death, so it's no problem with me doing that. And and
Mhm.
I didn't have that upbringing, despite the fact nowadays you hear everyone talking about like, oh, break the cycle, break the cycle. I didn't hear that back in the day, but like that's what my mother wanted to do. She and her sister were beat, like, for anything and everything. Like one getting a beating, the other one crying. Oh, you crying? Oh, let me give you something to beat about. Like, well, it's traumatic to see your sister being beat, right? So that's why they're crying. But like that also deserved a beating, right? Like any of that. And she just said, like, you know what? I'm not doing. I'm going to change. I want to change something radically, and so I just a lot of times I would see even 2-year-olds being like how they were, like just whacked, you know what I mean, upside the head, across the face. And so this idea of toughening on, you see it with the boys. I want to toughen them up. And I remember I had my oldest boy, I wanted him to have a certain, and I think even how I was raising my oldest boy was more toxic than I did my second son,
Mhm, mhm.
you know. Um, yeah.
I actually, I wonder about this part that you say around, you become the authority figure in your house before they have to meet another authority figure outside of you, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So it is that you mentioned Emmett Till, and this became another thing with Trayvon Martin,
Hmm.
and then a series of young Black men after that. Um, um, there's just the names keep going on and on.
Yeah.
And that's what you're parenting against in a lot of ways in your mind.
Yeah. A whole museum in Alabama, just right, like where,
The lynching museum.
and it's not even everything, right?
Yeah. But loving your kid doesn't, uh, being tough on your kid doesn't prevent those things from happening still. Right. So showing your kid kind of tough love and, don't do this and don't do that and correcting all the time and not being caring and gentle and whatnot, that results in the type of person that you would expect it results in. If you're always being shut down, if you have one group of kids who are always being told color outside the lines and use the different colors and free and expressive and blah blah blah, and they're taking that to heart, right? That's one
Mhm.
group of kids over here. And you got this
Mhm.
other group of kids from the very beginning who are having their hands slapped and being told, don't touch that, don't do this, don't go there. When we get in the store, don't say nothing, don't ask nothing, don't ask me for nothing, blah, 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 blah. That raises two different kinds of children,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Two totally
Absolutely.
different kinds of kids, right?
Hmm. And people don't understand that, Chris. I mean, that's the part for me that's there used to be this educator. I can't remember her name, but I'll tell the story that she used to share. It's like, and she would call it the eggplant story. And she like two different parents, and she was talking about our parents too. You know what I mean? She was specifically talking about like what sometimes black children may experience, but of course it's tied to things. Some people look at it like, oh yeah, that's how black people are. No, it's also tied to the structural racism and oppression that they endure. And then I'll try to make it like really short because she would make it a whole presentation. But the idea of the eggplant story: one child going in, points to little kid, 4 or 5 year old, points, picks up the eggplant, like, what's this? And the parent says, oh, that's an eggplant. You know what? Like it's a type of whatever fruit or whatever vegetable, blah blah blah. You know what? Let's actually get it. And let's go home online, look it up. Let's look up some recipes, blah blah blah. Even though that wasn't part of their original shopping list, right? It was just is engaging in this conversation. And then there's another, parent, same thing. Kid touches the eggplant. Like, I already told you to pre-enter the store speech about don't ask, don't touch, don't make a fool, don't embarrass, all of that. And then they had the audacity to touch an eggplant, something they had never seen before. And like, see, then I tell you, blah, 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 might even get a pop. I told you this is why I'll never bring you to the blah, 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 right? And then it just continues, like just carries on. Like, what's the trajectory if that happens tens of thousands of times in all these different scenarios? It's going to be very different children. You know,
Mhm. So let
one.
me let me ask you something provocative about that point then.
Mm,
And you tell
mm.
me if I was wrong or not. So I was once in a store and I saw a mother and a young child who at the time I had a child the exact same age, and he touched something, and not only did she slap his hand and get in his grill and yell at him, and I saw him shut down like like I can't touch nothing type of thing. She also used the drop the f bomb as she was talking to him, right?
Mm,
Cussed and
mm,
whatnot. Now, because I'm a social media person, I put this on social media. I can't believe in this day and age we are still shutting down young people in this way. After years and years and years of knowing what this feels like as kids and blah, 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 we still do it. And the feedback that I got on posting that wasn't that it's wrong to do that. The
you
feedback
shaming
was
parents.
the shaming parents and you don't know what's going on in their life and just a lot of kind of like sympathizing not
Hmm.
with the victim, right?
Hmm.
Because when I'm looking at that situation, I'm looking at a young person who has their whole life ahead of them and thinking, what you just did, what does that message do to them tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day after that, if that's what they're
Hmm.
being raised in, right?
Hmm.
But I don't think, like in our community, it could be very, this could be a topic rife with controversy.
Our
Like
community is
maybe
like,
touchy
mind your
subject. So
business. This is
mind
my
your business.
kid, and I do what I want to this kid.
Yeah.
Regardless of the impact this kid may have on society later.
Yeah. Yeah.
The more you produce angry, shut down kids, that's going to have an impact on their teacher, how they're taught, their classmates who are next to them, society at large, right? Like, and so this is why parenting is a microcosm of society. You're not removed from society, and no, you can't control necessarily parents, but like the idea of raising a conversation, pushing and challenging and setting, just exploring, like, hey, here's an optimal way, and addressing the conditions that may give someone the impatience, right? Because part of the eggplant story, that parent that was like, real short and you know uh verbally abusive, that you showed, or popped, or physically abusive. Like some of it's like, all right, what's the condition? Like, so when they told the eggplant story, she went to a crappy school. Now she has a crappy job. Right? Like, it's like what Malcolm said, like, when you're in the Black neighborhoods in our communities, they give you a crappy education, which leads you to a crappy job, which leads you to a crappy life, right? And so then it's all these conditions that you're now wearing. She may be pressed for time. She may be like having to, get to work. She might have a midnight shift, all those kind of things. Whether about to be evicted. And we're just painting this big picture, right? Very broad brushes. But just the pressures of being in a society that's unjust has an impact on even parenting, is what I believe the eggplant story was trying to express. So it was like, yes, raising the bar and like teaching, and everything's a teaching moment, right? Like, and not to like jump in and tell people how to parent in public, but raising the conversations, having more and more people understand the quadrants in generally, and where do Black children thrive the best. Like Hillary Beard says, out of those four, Black girls generally can do well in 3 out of the 4. Black boys needs the authoritative, the specific. That's where they thrive the most, like in that single quadrant. Like they don't do as well in the permissive. They don't do well in the authoritarian. The authoritative is where, like, that's the bullseye for Black boys. Black girls, where it may be a little bit more flexibility, according to the research that she had been doing.
But why? But why? Because I agree with you. I'm not going to give you a hard time about this, because definitely my parenting with my daughter is different than my parenting with my son. But that sounds. I tell people all the time, when it comes to my daughter, on the day she was born, I became a feminist and a sexist on the same day, right? Like a feminist around, she should be able to do whatever she wants to do, and the whole world should be her territory.
Why weren't you a feminist when you had your sons?
No, I wasn't. I'll just be like real clear about it. I wasn't about that life when just the sons. But feminists in the idea that this is a person who should be able to do whatever she wants to do, wherever her talents want to carry her. There should be no barriers. I don't want my daughter having any glass ceilings, any kind of velvet handcuffs, nothing. This is a free human being. You should be able to do whatever she wants. That's the feminist part. The sexist part,
I haven't heard that before.
The sexist part of it is, and her brothers better make sure she never has a problem in life. It's your job your entire life, especially after I die. It's your job to make sure that this person never has a problem in life.
Yeah, but that was my point of why weren't you a feminist then? Because they're going to have daughters and wives, or whatever too. That's why I'm just like, be a feminist.
It becomes real to you when you have a daughter, though.
It becomes more real.
It becomes more real to you when you have a daughter, when you start asking yourself, how do I want my daughter to be treated? So you're driving down the street and somebody cuts you off or does something, and you get into your road rage moment, and then you pull up beside the person and you see it's a young teen girl who's not paying attention and whatnot. At that moment, you can allow your road rage to go further and start being a jackass and saying things that are jackashish, and whatever. And then you stop because you're like, my daughter is going to be driving in this exact same situation one day. And how do I want the man who is going to be road raging to act when it's my daughter? Right. I don't think it should require you to have a daughter to have that level of empathy and understand in the moment. I'm just saying it's a reality that maybe, maybe it's just a reality. Like it shouldn't be, but there's a lot of things in life that shouldn't be a certain way. But when you have a daughter, I think as a man, a part of your life, a part of your heart and your mind opens up in a way, in my mind, this is just one guy talking, in a way that maybe you haven't thought about before. So again, back to it, with my daughter, when she was born, I became a feminist and a sexist on the same day. There are things that she doesn't have to do that her brothers have to do. There are experiences that I'm trying to provide for her that I think will be different for her in her life, so that in her relationships in the future, she will be demanding and demand more that I'm not doing with my sons. There are things, there are things she can get away with. She can get away with anything with me. It's her mother that really I bring down the gauntlet sometimes, because I am not about I don't do discipline with the daughter. But
the authoritative is your wife at this point, right? Like,
I'm totally permissive. With the daughter, I'm totally a permissive parent, and it forces my wife to be authoritative parent, and maybe sometimes
to bring the balance to the force. To woods to the
Yes.
forest.
Yes.
Listen,
Uh,
listen. I mean, I no, I hear you with your daughter. But it was just interesting. Like, when I was a teenager, and I remember saying like I didn't want daughters, and God blessed me with four, right? But as a teenager, I
mm,
remember saying this to my dad. I was like, he's like, why not? I was like, man, the daughter might make me soft, dad. Like, no, I'm trying to be out in this world. Like, he's like, what's the matter with you? You know what I mean? So he like, there was one of those opportunities. You met my dad. Like, he's just like, son, let me talk to you. You know what I mean? Like, Brand. It was like a weird, immature, juvenile way of thinking of, just machoism and manhood and all, just all the things. But they, the true blessing. And I agree with you, definitely, more just how having a daughter and in this world, and how sometimes even fear may shape our parenting. Like, how will they be treated? What do I want them to be able to do? And I would say for Black parents is like this. So anybody with a daughter may have that. And then when we think about our Black daughter or just a Black child, right? Like, that's the layers, I think, that just adds to the complexity of everything being Black in America, right? Like, when you're in an anti-Black society, you're thinking about, you hear those guys, they're like, oh yeah, getting in the elevator, I have to think about this and that. And my job, I have to think about this and that. Like, it's all this extra stressors and things that you're thinking about. Like, can I wear this? Is this too loud? Will they think this? Well, women talk about that same experience in a with patriarchy. Oh, will they say this if I mention this, right? You see, with women versus men politicians, just the
mhm.
slightest anything for a women politician, oh, you're not acting like a damsel in distress. Da, da. And then if you act like a damn, oh, it's not strong enough to lead. Like, it's all these complexities that society adds to it. So I would say, and it's part of parenting too. Like, it is a constant thought process. But so I have my first two were sons, and then I have four daughters. Uh, you know, uh, back to back to back to back, and they changed everything. They changed everything. And had already changed from son one to son two. But I think my daughters were, I wanted them to be fearless and strong and all of that, and recognizing that they're all different too. Like, I had one,
Mhm.
absolutely, she was equestrian. Like, she was, riding horses, jumping over things. It's like, I would necessarily, that wouldn't necessarily be something I sign up for. I love riding horses, but I don't need them to jump. You know what I mean? Like, galloping and a trot is fine with me. For her, no, that ain't good enough. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, she wanted, and I wanted her to, I would feel exhilarated, like, oh my God, you know what I mean? But I wanted her to have that. Now my youngest daughter, she ain't going near a bunny rabbit, let alone a horse. You know what I'm saying? So they're all different. So matching our style with who they are, and then in the society, and our family dynamics, all of that is it's complicated, man. And when people talk about, like, oh, we need parenting classes before your parents, I'm like, I don't disagree. I wouldn't say mandatory, but like offering them, in our faith-based institutions, in our, community spaces. I think we need more of that. I don't think there's enough. There's this kind of independence, not recognizing your parenting style is going to have an impact on society. So we should at least have these dialogues, conversations, classes even. What's the best parenting for our children, our
Do
Black
do you
children in
you
particular?
think this is something we should talk about in school? Parenting styles and should there be like family studies, maybe something like that that we teach in all schools?
I think I could easily see how it fits in, but it probably in a broader topic, right? A lot of schools, like I took psychology, one on one or whatever in high school. Like, I can easily see, something like that. Or, if we got family and consumer science, but it's only about cooking and sewing, that's a problem. Like, how about family consumer science in a more broader? So I do think there are ways to think about it, talk about it, um,
I think
and just
home ec could be
interacting.
the
Period.
vehicle. Home ec
Yeah.
could be the vehicle, maybe.
Hmm.
I mean, I took home ec in high school, and I don't know how prevalent it is anymore. I know it was at one point it was just everywhere. Like high schools did it. I think it's one of the
Yeah.
things that got cut in all the, like, kind
Yeah.
of
It's probably
math and science
smaller.
stuff. But learning how to cook in the middle of my day, learning how to make a family budget stretch. I think I've told you this before. We had and this is boys and girls in the same class. We had an assignment where we had to take $10 to the grocery store, and we had to feed the most people with $10, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the poor kids won that particular assignment, right? Like,
They knew beans.
they knew
Listen.
beans and rice and it's starches and things that expand and go a long distance, and it was imaginative. But what was interesting in there, just this may sound silly, but I can remember being in my 20s and living on my own in an apartment, and the fried chicken recipe that we had that I learned in home ec was amazing. And I was cooking for myself in ways that at times when I had roommates or friends, they were like, "How did you learn to do all this stuff?" Well, first of all, I learned at home, like watching my grandmothers and my family members or whatnot. But I also in home ec, that was a very good class. And I don't know why we couldn't expand home ec to include family studies about parenting styles. So when you because I don't think, listen, man, with my oldest, the very first time that I was left alone with a baby that was mine, my experience in that moment was like thinking, I can't believe the world thought it was to leave this thing with me, right? Like by myself. Like, you mean I got no backup? Like, I'm literally sitting in this apartment with the little human being in my hand, kind of holding them like this, like, why did y'all leave me with this whole ass baby, right? They left me with a whole baby, and the amount of kind of like
you're like, this is irresponsible of you, society.
It was irresponsible of my in-laws, of my parents, of my wife, my family, my friends, anybody who knew me. It was irresponsible to just put a live being in my hand, not because of anything other than there's no preparation for this. Like, I realized in that moment, I literally don't know anything about this, right? Like this is, I've babysat before. It's not like I knew nothing about taking care of kids, but the whole parenting thing was something that I had to learn over time. Never learned it in school. Only learned what I did learn. I learned from TV and watching family members, like our own family and family members.
Yeah, I mean, but even that says a lot, right? Like, we're, particularly in our community, how often things were intergenerational, where society says, no, don't do that, be independent, do this on your own, right? Like, I tell my kids, like, listen, home is home for as long as you want. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we'll reconfigure stuff, you know what I mean? Like, even if you're married, like, in society, and especially like growing up in Iran and then seeing here, having international friends, to have this constant thing, get out, strike on your own, like, go westward and just go, you know what I mean? Like, all this stuff where, like, suppose that's, that when a new parent might need even more guidance and more support, right? Like, and just that understanding. And I get everybody can't do it, but I don't think we should just buy into society's constant messaging, barrage of messaging about individualism, in all aspects. Parenting, get out, get on your own, do your thing. That's one piece. The other thing, I agree with you with home ec, and I think sometimes and it goes back to like tracking. Sometimes like all the black kids or black girls or Latino girls are in home ec, and when I took a course at Temple, and the students. So this is still happening. They're like, this was a white woman, and she said we were talking about different issues, and she mentioned like it wasn't until she became a senior that she realized like all the Latina students were in home ec. She said the counselor never put home ec or suggested home ec to my for me for my coursework, but she realized like her Latina friends eventually, and she's like, first she was just oblivious to it, didn't really pay attention, but after a while she realized they were all tracked to one type of course. So that's complicated. But I also remember being a middle school teacher at Turner Middle School, and us reading Things Fall Apart, and a home ec teacher allowed us to make peanut stew, which was like a staple part of fufu, and peanut stew was a staple for Okonkwo, this main character in this village in Nigeria. And so we used home ec. We, it was like, oh, we got a kitchen, we got this, and Baba Changa, my favorite teacher, came in and showed the students how to make peanut stew, right? Like, and so there,
Mm,
but I would say the other thing, it doesn't have to live in home ec alone, right? Because we often talk about where would this go, for example? How did Africans look at family, right? Would that necessarily be in home ec, or could that be in history, or even in the literature, like what's read? Like, how did they? There are so many African societies that looked at children are the closest to the ancestors, like they're the ones that just came into this world. And so, like, smacking them in the face would be like something that would be abhorrent to some of these societies, because they're like, no, that is like returning from the spirit world as a child. They're
mhm.
just coming in. They're closest to the ancestors, so we need to actually pay close attention to them. What are they saying to us? What are they like their cries, their desires, their wants? What are they communicating to us? And we have to be so in tune to that, right? Or the Islamic perspective, like 0 to 7, the child is the king or queen of the house,
Mm.
and spoil them. There is no such thing as spoil them. 0 to 7 is like they are center, and then from 8 to 14 is more of a guidance. Like they are now serving the community, the household, and then from 14 to 21, they are your like your right hand. Like you're solving problem. You're looking outwards, and they're practicing. You're giving them insight. This is how I thought about this. This is what they're doing. They're like your vizier. And so that Islamically, that's how it's broken up in these three parts: 0 to 7, 7 to 14, 14 to 21. Each one having some guidelines and suggestions of how to raise, right? And so all of that, I wouldn't necessarily even just put it in home ec, but I think it can you know, go across all of those courses. But again, it's like an orientation too around families, microcosms of society, and how
Mhm.
it all interacts.
What I like about that is that there's international ways of parenting that we can talk about. And if we had a families studies case,
Hmm.
Hawaiian parents do something very different.
Hmm.
Parents in other countries have different styles of parenting. They feed their kids differently. I'm writing something this week in a
Oh
blog
yeah,
post
yeah.
around Japan. Like
Hmm.
Japan has its kids do independent things earlier. So the parenting styles around the world could be its own course. It could be something
Hmm.
that you talk about. I definitely to be taught here in this country what the research says, so that when you become a parent 5 years later or 8 years later or a decade later, after you've had this course, something's triggering you that, yeah, I remember I learned about that. I learned what babies need. I learned what parents should do and what types of parenting are faulty. But let me ask you a question about this too, specific to Black parents and parents of color. Um, um, and I should say I have a additional level of difficulty because I'm raising multiracial children in a society that is very bifurcated and likes to put people into single boxes. And I don't think that I can get monoracial people to understand the difference in multiracial parenting, just because it's in some ways it's a very taboo topic. People don't think that it's a category, for one, and for second, you get, I think, an additional level of negative feedback when you even talk about multiracial parenting. So
Mm.
save that aside a little bit, because that's a complexity of everything we're talking about. But for parents of color, do you think we should find a way, or do you have any ideas about finding a way of not transferring our own stuff to our kids in terms of limitations, things that limit them? You mentioned you have a daughter that wanted to be an equestrian and go horse riding. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing no horse riding. That's not about that. I'm not John Wayne. We're not doing this. And for a lot of parents, things with water. Oh, we're going
I
to go
just
on the
got an
lake.
image with you on a horse. I'm like,
Mm-mm.
nah, I can't see that.
No, 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 no. I'm not John Wayne. What the hell is this? But you have a child who's, daddy, the school has a thing we could go do, or blah blah blah. And you might transfer your own limitations to your child because it's
Hmm.
just stuff that, like, is out of your own comfort zone if you didn't grow up that way, right? So
Hmm.
do you have ideas or thoughts or strategies about how we don't pass our limits on to our kids
Hmm.
and have them become limited people because of us, because of what we don't want to do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think it is so critical, and I think this is probably one of the most important things that parents should think about. Like, what messages, what's my trauma, what are the limitations, what are my fears that I am transferring to nurture versus nature. What am I nurturing in my child, right? Back in the day, my college room, we were all homies, and we took my friend's godson to the beach, and he was fine. You know what I mean? His mom met us there the next day, and she was afraid of like sharks or whatever. Like she screamed about some, I don't even remember, like, towards the beach. The rest of that weekend, that boy, and he was like 4 or 5, he didn't go near the water at
Mm-hmm.
all.
Mm-hmm.
And we were all young, young parents, and I remember saying, like, like that can have an impact on him, forever. And like just seeing that in action, this kid changed the next day, from loving, having fun, playing, to like being very fearful. Um, and I often wonder that, and when I would talk to folks about parenting, in these seminars and stuff, that's some of the things that we do. Like, if we have a kid in a box, and this is how sometimes we're raising our children, we're telling them stay in this box. And then later in life, we're saying, how come they're not more adventurous? How come they're not trying out new
Mm-hmm.
things? How, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's interesting. It's like we raise them there. No, stay there. Don't move. Be seen, be heard. Because I said so. Don't do this. Don't do that. Like this constant piece. And then later, we're out and we see them from afar as they get older, and we're wondering, why didn't you try? Why didn't you try the new job? Or why didn't you try that? What do you mean? Like, then we're criticizing. Why aren't you more adventurous about life? Why aren't you going
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
taking on more challenges, when you were constantly told, you were raised to not take on those challenges, to not go too close to the boundary, right? Like, and that shapes things, and it's not only going to shape the child, it's going to shape the grandchild, right? And so that is a part of thinking about what are we transferring, and how do we make sure, like, hey, you know what, in Islam there's this quote, don't raise your children the way you were raised. They were created for a different time. And so
Mm-hmm.
what will they need, right? In the future, right? There's some things, anchor, universal character things that you need, no matter, that span the test of time and space. But then there are other things that we have to really recognize, like they weren't raised to be Gen X's. They weren't raised to be, Gen Z's. They're actually raised for a different time. And we don't know what that is, but that means we have to make sure that we are open and trying to understand, okay, what is it that they will need, and not just assume, hey, this is it. This is nothing. Stay in this box. But that's one thing that I hope and wish that we can discuss more, because when we're shutting, you can't shut someone down constantly in all the different ways, and not just home, right? Because then they go to school, they're also being shut down.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. They're also being
Mm-hmm.
told, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. So they're getting it at home and school. What do you think is going to be produced? Right. Like just the psyche and the limitations. Then later on, you just see on people shouldn't be limited of what they think, and they need to think more expansively. Like, where do they practice that? Where do they see that? In school, at home, in the community? And then lastly, I would just say, when you see that research around like how little children are spoken to one on one, having a one on one conversation, it, growing up, it's so little, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's something
Mm-hmm.
crazy when I read it as a teacher. I think it was like less than 10 minutes a day, someone's actually having a conversation with you, and not commands. Most of the conversations that a kid hears is could be a command, or you're just listening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Even at school, when they say like, "Oh, talk to your neighbor," it's like, "All right, 5 seconds is over. All right, come back and listen to me." Right? It's very few like just sit there and listen. This is why later people say like they listen, like that's part of what they remember the most. This person listened.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you think what we do with our kids to prepare them for a world that has a lot of racism in it also is a way of limiting what they dream about and what they think about? I mean, if we tell them around every corner there is a threat of some sort, and this is what conservatives actually um, accuse us of often is teaching our kids to be victims, teaching our kids that, there's danger that lurks around every corner. And I feel kind of two kinds of ways about this, but, you know, I'm open to the idea that that's also limiting how they can dream and what they think that they can do if you're telling them to look for a boogeyman around every corner, even if some boogeymen are real, right? Like, even if the reality is that, I think you can overdo it, but I'm not so sure because in some ways, you're also trying to save their life if they get into situations. Um, but again, is my situation that I grew up with authoritarian figures and institutions going to be the same one that they have? Are they going to have the same situation that I had? I mean, maybe I'm passing on some of my own things to kids when I do that. It's a long question, but the short question there is: do you think when we're trying to prepare our kids for a racist world, do you think we're overdoing it sometimes in ways that stops them from dreaming or wanting to participate in some things because they fear it? They don't want to go certain places, or because we've passed that on to them.
Yeah, I think it can go a long way, but I think you have to go really, really far to go too far. Like I think just in general, like for me, and even like how I was raised, like that is one thing that I am passing, along. Is like, no, this is how the world is, because I want them to be able to traverse it. I want them to be able to recognize it, but also not limiting. I'm still saying like, no, go, pursue, like change, because it's more or less around like, hey, you can be part of the community that enacts change, and that changes through how you live, what you pursue, what you do, how you lead, how you live. And so they're very cognizant, as we're upbringing, like we're pointing things out, and listen, some of us, man, like my brother will point out, he'll destroy a movie for you because he'll point out like, see that message? See that message? See that? Or just like, I know, but still let me, what I mean? The other parts of it is, and I do that also to some extent. Like I want them to see the hidden messages that are happening, both in society, in film, in cartoons, like whatever. Like they know the first thing I'm gonna say, the black person gonna die first, right? Like how often, they know like dad is, and it happens so much that they be like, they look at me like, Dad, all right, we know, you know what I mean? But can we still finish the movie, type of thing. So some of it is like tongue in cheek, but I do,
And
I
you know what's
definitely want to.
so unrealistic about that is the black folks in those movies would be the last one running out there trying to get involved in something that's going to get them killed. So that's what's so unrealistic about those movies, the horror movies. Like, no, the black person is not going to be the one who's going to say, hey, I think we should split up in the woods. I think we should go our own direction. Stop it. All right, well, listen, the provocative topic for last, and we don't have a ton of time here, but spanking. I just want to play this short clip because this clip was impactful to me for some reason. But here goes.
Spanking children is domestic
absolutely
violence.
Absolutely. It's not love.
I mean, if a man treated his wife the way that we think it's okay to treat our children, that would unquestionably be domestic violence.
Yes.
But when you say like, wow, even as much as your work as I've read, you calling domestic violence feel like, wow, really? But I mean, yeah.
It's contrary to everything we've been taught about corporal punishment. Hitting children is the only form of domestic violence that we call love and for your own good. Think about it this way. If I hit you or you hit me in this moment, somebody's going to jail,
Sure.
felony offense. If we walk down the street and smack a dog, we're going to get in trouble for that. But hitting children, this is the only group where it is codified in law. In every state, there is a law that tells you how you can appropriately hit a child.
I mean, like calling spanking domestic abuse and the only form of domestic abuse that is socially acceptable is a jarring thing, especially when we live in a society that says like, listen, I got my butt whooped, and I turned out fine. And
I turned out all right.
I turned out all right. And it's kind of like, bro, are you sure? Sometimes we have to ask, but it does put it in perspective when you say it's the only family member that you can hit that socially becomes socially acceptable. And what I didn't play in here was Toure says to her, you know, you sound really white when you say this stuff about our parenting. And she said, hitting children is the whitest thing I've ever seen. That's her response. Beating your children is a Western concept. And she goes on that. This whole thing was kind of mind blowing for me because, you know, listen, we don't practice that in our household, but I'm definitely familiar with the argument that, listen, we all had to get like a butt whooping at some time and it was good for us and whatnot. Where do you come down on this? This is pretty provocative, I think, in a way, because, you know, I don't think her is the common view of it.
Oh, her view is definitely not the common view, and I would say it should be. You know, the amount of abuse that kids take, and you know, seeing in supermarkets, seeing a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, like, you know what I mean? When that and because people, and again, so much of it is out of fear. Or, you know, the thing, I'm bringing up things fall apart again, and what Achebe talks about this is like people are ruled by anger and fear. Anger and fear, right? All this like, oh, this hurts me more than it hurts you, and I'm doing this because I love you. I'm abusing you because I love you. Like the message that sends. But often you're doing it out of anger and frustration and fatigue and all these other parts of, you know, like what brings you to, you know, beat down a kid. And the story, and I, you know, I didn't experience, you know, a lot of this as a child, but hearing the stories and seeing it, you know, and then even today where you know, sometimes this blows up. You're right. It's very unpopular because you see people go hard for, you know, like, I mean, and telling stories and just like nonchalantly and think it didn't have any impact on their psyche. You know, beating with extension cords, you know, beating with this and beating with, and then they tell the story, and I cringe because, you know, I didn't experience that, you know, and just, and I remember like, and like, I don't beat my children, but I do remember beating my oldest son once, and I never did it again. You know, when I thought about it, it's just like, you know what, that was absolutely not the way to do it. And it was out of anger and frustration and fatigue. And it's like, that's exactly what I'm telling them, how not to make decisions, how not to operate. Yet I gave him an experience of being subjected to just that. And, you know, and I swore it off. And it's such an aberration because that's not how I was raised. Right. And so then it was like, okay, then there's something else going on, you know, with that. And so, you know, for me, yes, like it is absolutely, you know, something that warrants, you know, deeper and deeper conversation and elevate. And yeah, it is going to be a lot of pushback because people experience that. But I would go back to where did our people learn this from? Right. It was like, I'm gonna beat you half to death because I know if that happens in society, they may beat you to death. So I'll beat you half to death. So you understand, like, don't backtalk. You know,
it's kind of like the theory of vaccines is like, I'm going to introduce some of the poison into your system so that your body, you have natural antibodies. Yeah, it's going to save you. So I'm going to give you some of the poison, not the full poison that would hurt you or kill you, but enough poison so that it inoculates you against it. I think that's kind of like the vaccine theory of things. But I get what you're saying. I think it's such a strong cultural force, though, that it's just common sense that, of course, this has been part of, you know, life of raising.
Listen, my college roommate,
though, you know,
my college roommate used to say, "Oh, I can't wait to have my kid. Yeah, I'm going to do this. And I'm going to do that. And this is because this sort of." And this is while we're in college, and I was like, just aghast.
He was looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's just like, bro, what are you talking about? Like, just how it was just so normalized for him that, oh yeah, anything, right? You know. And then by this time, when I had a kid, he was like, "Yo, what are you, like? Why aren't you?" And I'm just like, "Nah, like that's not, you know." And eventually, guess what? When he started having kids, he did. Because by that time, he still really started thinking, like, you know what, like, how did I learn that? Where did I learn that? And is that something that I want to, you know, pass on? So he was looking at it more critically as he got older, as opposed to, this is how society is. This is what, you know, what it does. And we even had this conversation on 8 Black Hands before, like even the, you know, spare the rod, spoil the child, you know, type of thing. And and pushing back on the narrative, just like, sometimes people interpret languages differently, and how the original language for rod, and again, I'm not, proficient in Aramaic or anything like that, but it talked about it was really a shepherd's rod, and the rod was for guidance. Nobody was beating their sheep with the rod. It was a shepherd's rod. Nobody was beating, like, spare the rod. Like, yeah, if you spare the rod with your sheep, they may go astray. A wolf may get them. They may get lost. Blah blah blah. It was for guidance, and that was like the metaphor. And people took it as like, oh, rod, that means beat you upside your head, you know what I mean, or you'll go astray. It's like, just suppose like that's not what it was meant.
Yeah, I mean, Christian, Judeo-Christian Western thought has a lot of punishment in it. Like our system of rehabilitation isn't a system of rehabilitation. Our incarceration system is one of punishment and retribution. It's a very retributive way of seeing it. It's not a way that actually makes society better. Like if you have people that do bad things, making them more hardened and more capable of doing more bad things is not exactly a good system. But if you're so punishment focused, instead of being rehabilitative focused, that's what you do, right? And the whole religion in some ways is sold as either you do what God tells you to do, or you're going to face the ultimate punishment, hell, right? So there is this sense woven into us that you do need punishment and correction to be good, to be part of the good life. I think that doubles down even in our community around society is going to be looking at you a certain way. So I'm going to head that off by being very tough on you while you're younger, so that you don't go out thinking you're like these other kids who can just, and this is the thing, and I'll end with this and see what you think about it. Why does parenting style matter? Why is it important that we have these discussions? Because we're raising human beings, and their intellectual development is in our hands, and we have an obligation to our ancestors and also to our descendants coming, down the road, to do our part to raise free people. Right. So that's, to me, why it's important to struggle with these questions around what type of parenting should I do and style should I have. When you see young people of color, young Black people in social media and elsewhere doing really kind of antisocial things, right? Shootings in Chicago, shoplifting in San Francisco, just filling up bags of things, getting in street fights, girls getting in street fights and pulling each other's hair off and all that type of stuff, which is abundant in social media. We can't pretend like it's not there. We can't pretend like it's like we don't see it and it's not there. There are two ways that you can look at that. You can look at that. These are a bunch of kids that need punishment, and they need
more beatings.
They need more beatings, and they need something to correct them. And if you don't love them or care about them, that becomes the easiest kind of emotion to have about them, is that we should beat them. I want you to beat them, right? And punish them and blah, 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 because they're not your kids, because you don't love them. So if it was your kid, your child, so when it was crack, we shoot them in jail and throw away the key. When it became fentanyl and opioids, we need kind of therapeutic kind of policies, right? So that's why we look at our own kids, not us, but the society looks at our kids and thinks this punishment, this hard parenting style is what they need. Where are the daddies? They need daddies because their mamas don't beat them well enough, right? They need daddies to be the disciplinarian, to come in there and do this patriarchal kind of like raising. The other thing that we might do, though, is when we see them, is say that child is the sum total of all experiences that they had at the hands of adults. And what did the adults do? Stop talking about beating the child. If anybody, first of all, beat the adults. Beat all the adults, not the parents. I mean, all the adults.
All the adults, right?
All the adults.
Mayor, the police,
the mayor, the city council, the police, the courts, their social workers, their counselors, their teachers, their principals, their mamas, daddies, and everybody. Just beat everybody. Don't beat them. Let them be the last ones, because they are the sum total of all the adults in their life, right? And we can blame it on one group or the other, but everybody's got a hand in this. They're also a product of society, right? And the society that we made, that we endlessly remaking and putting them in. So when I see all those Chicago stories and I see the stories and the fights and all that stuff, yeah, I do have an inclination where I think, like as a parent, you should like get in there and correct them in some way, shape, or form. I think the smarter, more mature way is for us to have a conversation about what went wrong and how we should be changing it. How should we change our parenting style? How should we change the way that we view kids and honor and value children? That should be the discussion that we have, because we're not getting it all right. I've been a parent since 1990. And I will tell you that don't let me ever fool you into thinking I've got this thing figured out, because I don't. Right. I'm questioning myself all the time, constantly. I'm making mistakes. I'm being too loose on some things, too strict on other things. But it's good to at least have the conversation and acknowledge it and try to do better, because these kids are going to be we're going to die someday. These kids are going to be out of our care. And we should have done all that we possibly can to create for them a way to interact with the world that is prosperous for them, that helps them do their very best and live their very best life. So that's where I'm going to end on this one right now, is basically to say, I do think it's important for us to talk about parenting styles. I think it's equally as important for us to do it with humility and to understand that we don't know it all. We don't have it all figured out. But it's the job. That's what the job is. The job is stressful and tiring, and you have to do a bunch of mental gymnastics. And when you're a person of color, you have to do even more mental gymnastics about, are you doing the right thing for kids? But I'm going to end there and see what's your final word on all this.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you said there, Chris. I do think that there's so much of blame, and I think that we have to go back to both individual and collective responsibility. Sometimes I'll post things and I get all these mainly white folks like, yeah, then it'd be individual responsibility. This is what and they don't care what the policies, procedures, education, law, anything to absolve adults who are making big decisions, and those with the most power to actually enact change. They're absolved from anything, and everything is like, all right, who is the end user, that was impacted by that policy? They should be held the most accountable for everything. And I think this is just another example, like, and parenting is like teaching in so many different ways. It is. And that's why that home and school connection has to be improved, because it is so powerful. It can be so powerful in a positive way. And then this whole idea of like how we're, there's some, sorry, there's some of these, sometimes you see these images where a parent, is raising their kid. They're filming like, yeah, I'm teaching my kid how to cook, so they're not impressed by your little
Yes.
McDonald's date. You know what I mean? Like, I love those. Those are so funny because they look at the camera like, yeah, that's what I'm like. I love that, And then I think the humility part, I like you were also, became a parent in 1990, and even just my evolution as a parent. Like I remember I was one way, involved in another. Like I was still growing, talk about, I was a parent, what they say, frontal lobe isn't fully developed till 24, 25. Well, I was a parent before that then, for one, which is back to your scary point. I'm like, yo, that's scary. You know what I mean? But then secondly, which is also why I'm glad there were, the proximity of family to be able to guide and continue to support even as grandparents. But then also just remember in my first marriage and my divorce, I was probably, in that quadrant, I probably became permissive at some point out of fear, because I'm like, all right, I was the main custodial parent, and being more permissive because I didn't want to lose that, but it was out of fear. And it wasn't always the best thing for my children, but I was just like, hey, I want them to be super duper happy. I don't want to, you know what I mean? Like, oh, I got to go back to court. I want to, right? Like, and just, I'm sharing that. Like, that was out of, when looking back, a lot of my parenting decisions was out of fear of like, hey, I have main custodial parent. I don't want to lose this. If they get angry, or if they get to the point where the judge is like, because sometimes they would suggest, say, hey, we may have the kids come and tell, I'm like, I don't want them to say that they didn't, blah, 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 didn't have ice, I wanted them to have like the ice cream. I wanted to be the Disney parent, even though I was the custodial parent. And that means some of my decisions were wildly wrong, and I wouldn't do that today. But at that time, fear fueled how I was thinking about, parenting, unconsciously. So yeah, we have to approach it with humility. And I would say, like, with these type of dialogues, in our public spaces and classes, as far as like, here's the research, here's the so. And lastly, I would say, you know, I worked at not only the Youth Study Center for a hot minute, which is basically children waiting to be adjudicated, but also worked as a bail interviewer for people who had been arrested and I had to make bail recommendations for the judge. At some point, I started asking, how many of you were beaten? Right, like who? 99% of them they had been beaten as children, right? And so this idea, like that's the only way to help guide people, is extremely problematic, because they were all beat. And if you go to prison today, I would imagine that many of them would say, oh yeah, I used to get beat upside my head with all kind of stuff. Like that in alone, like let's start with conversations, let's start with love, let's start with like human psychology and need, you know, like what do human beings need, and start from there, instead of like what type of punishment do they need to be better. Just like what type of love do they need, what type of society, what type of embracing do they need, what type of conversation. You often say Black kids are the most studied, the least taught, you know, that goes also to family, right? Like this, how many of them, you know, most beat and less spoken with, listened to, you know, more likely to be beat than listened to, is something I also think about a lot. So let's be humble, let's converse, let's listen to children and their reaction, you know. And it got popularized in Wakanda, in Black Panther, right? You know, but the idea that, you know, the child's reaction is really basically what was their input, right? Like, and if they're not listened to, then they'll burn the village down to feel its warmth, right? Like that's a old proverb, you know, even though people may have first heard it in Black Panther.
I love everything that you just said. I think it's a good place for us to land and say that when you look at young people that are experiencing trauma, one, our young people have been the most studied. There's a whole industry studying our children, studying their trauma, studying, making books and lessons and trainings out of their trauma, living on their misery, having ideas about their misery to sell to other people. There's a whole industry of that. What is often missing is a critique of how that trauma came about, not just at the hands of their immediate parents, because you have to ask what type of trauma were they raised in, and what society or what context are they living in. So once you start getting up the funnel, you start seeing there's this whole top end that you need some critique of, and stop pretending like you're just going to fix the problem by fixing the victims, right? Fixing the victims is a convenient strategy because it leaves you unaccountable for having to do the real structural things that listen, two Americas. One child could grow up in a situation where everything in their suburb is affirming to them and has been built for them. They live in a built environment that has been completely built for their therapy, for their therapeutic growth and development, clean water, clean parks, green space, lack of over-policing, great resources, great programs, strong schools with strong resources and strong supports. And then you have another kid in the same country who is living maybe 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 miles away, who is actually experiencing the world in a very different situation. But when we look at the outcomes of those two kids, we look at the one that doesn't do well and doesn't thrive and say, what did you do wrong, unthriving person? And all that kid can say to you is, don't talk to me about this. You be honest about how I got here, or else let's just not even talk about it, right? And that's that's my final message on all this. I know I had a different final message, but you made me go off in a different direction, and I appreciate you, Fred. All right, friends and family, thank you for watching this episode of Freedom Friday. And hopefully you are freer than you were when we started this, but I don't think you're actually free. None of us are free until these discussions are unnecessary. We appreciate you as always. Share the show with friends and others so that throughout the week, other people come and watch the show. Not everybody can join us on a Friday morning. And what we see is a lot of the uptick of people watching are able to do it over the weekend or able to do it at a later time. So please share the show. We appreciate you.